There's an appropriate bumper between Coke and Pepsi. Bringing up both the head of digital for Pepsi, Shiv Singh, and the CMO of Global Consumer Engagement, Frank Cooper, of PepsiCo. What they're going to talk about, I think, is really important. We've spent a lot of time in the last few days talking about marketing and how that drives a lot of the business models of many of the companies that have been up here on stage. Frank just told me backstage that he wants to shift the perspective on how companies like ours can partner with brands, and I'm looking forward to hearing him unpack that sentiment. So please welcome Shiv and Frank to the Web2 stage.
Thanks, John. In case you don't know, you haven't figured it out, I'm Frank Cooper, and that's Shiv Singh. And we're going to do a little bit of a tag team, a two-for-one thing. It's a CPG thing. We do it in packaged goods quite a bit. But Shiv is going to talk about the role of digital in a new model that we're trying to create. I'm going to open by talking at a fairly high level about how we're shifting our thinking about how to create value, how to build brand value. Not only in PepsiCo, I think this applies across businesses and industries. It applies, I think, for political action, and it definitely applies in terms of how to build iconic brands. And I want to start with this. I get it. Yeah, you see a big brand come in. First thing is, it's almost like you almost can visualize a walking checkbook. So it's like you walk in the room, and the first thought is big budgets. First thought is don't really get digital, and then you think in terms of the ecosystem, the primary role of the big brand is to bankroll something, to underwrite something that is the true benefit to the consumer. And I hate to disappoint, but we've actually believed that we're in the business not only of selling beverages, but we're in the business of pop culture, of creating hits. We're not just a monetization strategy for another company. And this is not so much a defensive measure. I think it's an opportunity for all of us to kind of rethink how we connect to each other, how brands connect with other content owners, other platforms, and other experiences. And in this idea of creating a hit, I spent most of my career really in hit-driven businesses. I spent 12 or so years in the record business. I was at Motown Records and at Def Jam Records. We focused on hit artists and hit songs. I co-founded an internet company. We're UBO.net. We were focused on hit channels. And even at Pepsi, a lot of times we focus on, can we create a hit product or a hit campaign? But what's really fascinating to me is that I think the idea of a hit is changing. Conventional hit is you capture the cultural zeitgeist of the moment, and hopefully a large number of people will follow you. I think the new hit is more of an acronym. It stands for humanity, imagination, and truth. And it sounds like a simple acronym and on some level obvious, but I think it has profound implications. Humanity for us means that it's people first. It's not you. It's not the brand. It's not the product. It's people first. And if you shift the lens to focus on how do I add value to people's lives, it changes the perspective on what's important for you as a brand and as a company. So instead of thinking about impressions, for example, we're going to be much more interested in meaningful experiences because that's something that adds value to people's lives. Instead of thinking of transactions, we're going to think about the human connection and how do I build long-term sustained relationships. So humanity is a fundamental shift for us. Imagination is a second element. And there, for us, what we see is all around us, we see accelerating change. A lot of times we talk about it in terms of technology, and it is true and probably most obvious there. But we're seeing accelerating change across everything, culture, social institutions, governmental institutions. And we think the only way to deal with that is creativity or imagination. And the shift there, the implication for us, is that that's now got to become a core competency for our company, and I think all companies. It's not farmed out to the elite few. It's a core competency that exists within the company. And then the last element is truth. And that's the most obvious, right? It should be easy. But I think there are two parts to truth. One is the objective truth, having transparency about what is objectively true. If we say it's 0 calories, you can test that in a lab and see if that is true or not. That's an important part. But there's also openness, having the willingness to have an honest dialogue with people regardless of how comfortable that might be. So the two parts of that truth, I think, change our behavior and will have implications to how we behave, but also how we partner. And if you filter all that for us, here's where I think in terms of partnerships, where we're making the most critical shift. And this probably falls more under the imagination piece than anything else. If you think about the 4 roles that we can play as a brand in partnering with people, it's really across 4 dimensions. You can be an observer brand, a sponsor brand, a curator, or a creator. And they're not mutually exclusive. But if you start from the top, observer brands basically reflect back what consumers already know. There's probably the least amount of value in that. A sponsor brand basically connects consumers with experiences that are interesting to them. You write the check, you get the association, and there's a certain amount of value in that. But where we're headed, and where I think the most valuable brands are headed, are toward curator brands and creator brands. The curator brands, they gain some cultural authority by filtering the extraneous from the essential. They curate for whatever their target consumer is. And then the most important one is becoming a creator brand. Can you actually create new experiences for your consumers? And that's probably the most uncomfortable role for partners, because that means we're now stepping into a role that's more similar to a producer. But that's where we want to play, and you'll see more and more of that over time. And I think this spectrum of observer to sponsor to curator to creator is something that, while we may not say it in a meeting, you may not see it in a presentation, it's one of the guiding principles that move us toward, one, the HIT principle overall, but also toward creating deeper value. And so what I want to do now is Shiv's going to take you through how this model connects to one of the platforms we've partnered with called the X Factor, but he'll do it in the context of curation and creation.
Great. Thank you, Frank. So what I'm going to do is just sort of bring to life some of those concepts for you. And I'm going to start with how we're rethinking the notion of what a digital sponsor itself is and what it means. And it starts with something very simple. So we're running this program where you do something quite easy for consumers. You snap a photograph of our logo and X Factor logo on one of our packages, and that unlocks amazing content for you. Content about that X Factor, content about the show, content that you wouldn't have access to unless you have that package in your hand. And that's a very simple thing, but very important. And yes, it's not QR codes. It's advanced image recognition technology, because we know a lot more people can snap a photograph and email than they actually have downloaded a QR code reader and stuff like that. But that's really the first piece of it. Though one thing I'd add to it is it's also a space where our packages, we have 300 million cases practically across America in every single neighborhood. So by definition, it's already a scale digital play. Where it gets more interesting is it takes you into these deeper consumer experiences that you couldn't get otherwise. So it makes our shareholders and other stakeholders really happy, because we're tying a deep consumer pop culture experience with business value through it. But there's another side to this, which we absolutely love. And that's represented by this really simple map. This is where people in the country are snapping all those photographs. Now, why this matters so much is not just because it's a cool Google Maps visualization, but there are a lot of different levels beneath it, which we dig into. So for example, we can find out in a particular location, how many people snap? Is that a DMA? Is that a neighborhood where our sales are much higher than our competitors? Is that a location in which people have higher tech adoption? Is that a location in which the differential between the number of people participating and the number of people buying our products is very great or very small? And then who are these people? What do they look like? How do they engage? It's amazing data, geo-targeted increasingly, that we can look at and match to our business metrics. Hugely valuable. So that's the first thing, digital sponsorship. We're a digital partner with the X Factor and, of course, a TV partner too, but we're extracting other kind of physio-digital realities from it. The second area is in the realm of digital curation. Now, for a long time, when we look at all the social data out there, the hundreds and millions of tweets and Facebook messages and blog posts and all that fun stuff that happens every moment of the day and is published live, we somehow invariably look at it from a very scientific standpoint. But we are arguably missing one of the most exciting opportunities, which is an opportunity to look at all this data, all this social data, and craft stories about it, for it to be the inspiration for narratives, for storytelling. So something we just launched in the last week is called Pepsi Pulse. And when you're watching the X Factor, these visualizations appear in this web experience. And they're telling you not positive, negative sentiment or any of that stuff, or the number of people on Twitter. They're telling you what people are really feeling and thinking about the show and about the activity on it. It's an emotional storytelling. And we think the data, ironically, gives us immense opportunity to do that more and more. Where it gets also more interesting is when we look at the social data from a back-end standpoint, and we try and understand, how can we understand how people are actually, how the show is performing compared to other shows in a social TV standpoint, meaning which shows are doing better, which are more talked about, which has greater viewing intent. You can only imagine how valuable this data is for us as we discuss future plans with our various media partners. There's one last piece to all of this that I want to talk about as we look at us playing different roles in the media ecosystem and not just as traditional banner ad advertisers, as I like to say, and that's as digital creators. So whether anyone likes it or not, we feel we have an opportunity to add value to our consumer experiences by also creating deep digital product experiences. It's a long journey. We're at the start of that journey. But this is something that we just soft launched last night. It's called Pepsi Sound Off. And the way to think of it is it sits on top of Twitter, adds a game mechanic layer to it, and is sort of like a bit of a Twitter, but for the X Factor super fan, meeting sort of a turntable type dynamic with a point system, leaderboards, and all that good stuff. It's really just for that X Factor social TV viewing experience, architected, produced by Pepsi, with technology partners helping it, but conceived in-house by us. It's a new role for us as a brand. And of course, no question, we also have a leaderboard. You can't have a digital product these days with a leaderboard. It's sort of funny. It's like I'm yet to come across one that doesn't have a leaderboard. So it has all this game mechanics, all this fun stuff. But we're doing something quite interesting and unusual with it. Every week, the people who are at the top of the leaderboard, and it's based on their comments and their social interactions and all the point system, we're going to actually put them in a TV spot on air on national TV. So we're flipping the whole model. Deep digital engagement around a TV show. You do really well in it, you get to go on national TV. And that's part of this multifaceted, incredibly integrated digital world we live in. So that's the Pepsi Sound Off, and just launched last night. And next time you're logging in, watching the X Factor, I think next Tuesday, be sure to go to PepsiSoundoff.com. So with that, I think I'll just hand it over.
Well, so I think we're out of time, so I'm going to go through this really quickly. The key takeaways for us will be the role of brands extend beyond simple sponsorships, and we're evolving towards creating and curating. We think of ourselves as not just a CPG company, but we are in some ways a startup, a media company, a tech company, all at once. And so we're going to start playing those roles increasingly. It's a real fascinating thing. If you look at our infrastructure, it can be used to deliver products like beverages, but we have a huge distribution system that gives us scale for digital engagement. And again, we want to leverage that. And then the last piece that Shiv covered, there's digital data that we're gathering. When it's linked to offline data, gives us a really compelling view into consumer behavior that we've never had before. I'll close with kind of going back in time, right, which is some things don't change. At 4 o'clock, we are going to have an open cocktail party, so you're all welcome. It's like the Mad Men days. Come on back and join us. Some things don't change. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Cocktail party. Leave